So, Wendy, I saw a lot of things coming through in chat. Folks are looking for how to really change behavior, creative incentives and sanctions. Um,
Yeah, I was noticing that as well. Lots of
yeah,
research on effective incentives and sanctions.
yeah. People want to know if there's actual data about it. Which
Yeah,
we have some, so I think we can really meet people's needs.
yeah. Well, it looks like they signed up for the right webinar.
Right. And for those of you that are just hearing for the first time, my name's Jessica Pierce. I work for the National Council, and also with us is our speaker, who is Wendy Schiller, who also works for the National Council.
Hello, everyone.
All right, so why don't you go ahead and tell them what we have in store?
Well, today we're going to be talking about incentives and sanctions and really getting into practical ways that we can implement this. I think a lot of us know about incentives and sanctions and sort of the research behind it, but how to practically put those in place is another thing. I think I'd like to ask the audience in a poll, Elo, if I could get you to bring that poll up. I want to gauge what the audience comfort level is with what we're going to talk about today. So I'd like to know, how much do you know about privilege reduction strategies to change youth behavior? Just go up and fill out that poll. Let's give a few seconds for everyone to be able to respond. Who's the expert?
I don't know, but we should hire them to do another
Yeah,
webinar.
yeah. So we're getting a lot of responses. Some saying they don't know anything. Some saying no, they know a little. No, some. So, oh, that went away really fast. So it's sort of like 50-50. Some people know some stuff. Some people know not very much. So we're going to go into more detail about that. So how much do all of you know about behavior contracts? Again, I know nothing. I know a little. I know some. I'm a complete and total expert. So we're still kind of in that 50-50 range of I know a little, I know some. So this is good because a lot of people have a little bit of experience with what we're going to talk about today, it sounds like, Jess. So this is good.
I think so too.
Great. And then one more poll question. How much do you know about inserting some program-wide incentives where we're really promoting like a strength-based atmosphere? So a little bit more of the I don't know very much about, I don't know anything about this in this section. So a lot of people they might be hearing this for the first time. But I would wager that you probably know what I'm talking about. And when you hear it, you'll be like, oh, I got ya. So pretty great. Looks like we have a really good crowd where we'll have some really good discussion here about individualizing incentives and sanctions. So some people don't know very much, some people know a little, and some people know some. So we're really going to get into it and talk about this. What we're really going to talk about, the objectives we're going to try to meet, is I want you to learn about privilege reduction strategies. Believe it or not, this sort of matches the questions I just asked you. I want you to learn about individualizing behavior contracts and learn about some program-wide incentives so we can really motivate families and engage in the program. And these are all concepts that I have put into a three-prong approach. So just to start off, I want to tell you guys up here, you can actually download the materials that go along with this webinar. So you can download the PowerPoint slides. There's an overview of the three-prong approach. There's a sample Gantt chart to help teams figure out how to implement some of these strategies, and then a build your own procedures worksheet. And this is meant just to give you a taste in sort of implementing or developing policies and procedures that will help you put these types of structures in place. The structure is almost the most important part because that's how we make sure we're doing what we said we would do. And you'll notice in chat that Jessica just wrote, we're planning on doing 3 more webinars. So a webinar for each of the 3 prongs so we can go into more depth into each of those prongs so you can really begin to build those policy and procedures in your own program. So I just want you to feel comfortable that you don't have to ask for slides. We already put them up there. There's a lot of information, so you're going to be welcome to download those and print them out for your own use. So there might be a perfect world of incentives and sanctions. There might be. I don't know. Let's see what you guys think. If there were a perfect structure to incentives and sanctions, what do you think it would look like? And I was thinking of 3 different questions. And if you could just go ahead and write in chat, like what type of incentives work best if we had the perfect world of incentives and sanctions? What are the types that we would use that would work best? Just tell me what you think that would be. And then I'm going to have Elo up here type some of the responses up here so you can have a visual aid so you're not just reading the chats. Family-based. Oh, money. Gift cards. Free or low cost. Sherry says, my kids like food and gift cards. Yeah. So a lot of gift cards, curfew extensions, reduction in community service hour, phase movement. Those are good. Candy. Tailored. I saw one up there, tailored for you, so individualized. Sport tickets.
But Sandy has done this with us before. She says, whatever the youth identifies. I want to add you guys know what you're talking about. We've got some readers in the audience.
Yeah.
Early departure, judicial praise. Oh, incentives for parents. Yes, Danny, that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, great. So we have we've created kind of a list here, right? I remember when, incentive lists were the big thing. People really wanted a list, right?
That's training for a long time.
Yep.
We spend a lot of time having folks really do a lot of brainstorming. And everybody always has such great ideas about this. I think it just really comes down to how does that actually work? And how do we implement it in a way that goes beyond just giving out that Subway gift card for a clean UA? And so that's, I think, what your 3-prong approach really does is it helps people figure that out.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jess. So let's ask the second question. If you can bring up that pod, let's go the other way. What is the best way to respond with a sanction? How do we respond with that sanction? If we have to put one in place, what's the best way to do that? Least restrictive, immediate.
Again,
Quickly. Got some experts here. Immediate, based on risk and need. In court, graduated in intensity, swiftly. Start small and work up to more unpleasant.
I like the term unpleasant sanction.
Yeah, me too. I haven't heard that one before. Thank you, Robin. Individually targeted. Perfect, Judge Jackson.
And based on information from the treatment provider, from Dennis, I think that's really important to think about with the team. You want to be always working together and using all of those different pieces of information you have from all team members.
Right, exactly.
Sanctions would match the violation. Yep.
Correct. Short duration, directly tied to behavior. These are all great. So let's move on to that last question. What would happen if we were using the types of incentives that work best and the best way to respond with a sanction? What would happen? What do we think would happen in our perfect world?
And I just want to mention that Dennis got in a plug for restorative justice, that the sanctions are restorative. And that's totally true. If we really had our perfect world, it would be about kind of giving back to the community and repairing harm.
Positive response, positive change, behavior change.
More good behavior.
Yeah, work diligently toward them, compliance, reduce negative behaviors, fewer sanctions, fewer complaints from stakeholders, identified behavior change, all this. Yep. It's like I always say, Jess, these people are experts.
You do. You always say that. And I think theoretically we all get it. And I love Robin says, youth would be more clear about cause and effect, understanding what the outcome is for compliance and noncompliance. And I think that is the entire reason we do sanctioning for behavior change, right? That there's a natural consequence for a behavior, and those two things go together.
Exactly.
Yes, Melanie, we'd definitely like that to happen.
Yeah. Thank you, Elo. I think that really gave them an overview of what was sort of trending in chat. And thank you, participants. I think that's great. When I first started thinking about the three-prong approach, it's what I was just saying with Jessica right there, is I really think that folks or team members in the field understand the theory behind incentives and sanctions. It's just putting that part into practice. So research and theory tells us, we use incentives and sanctions that are fair, consistent, immediate, individualized, and need a 4-to-1 ratio. But how easy is that? Let me ask you guys, is this easy? So if you could just go up there and fill out that poll, how easy is it to do all those things? Yeah. I get it. There's a lot of no's, and there's sometimes, because I get it's not perfect all the time, but sometimes we get a winning situation.
Yeah, I think
but mostly no's here. Yeah.
Individualizing incentives and sanctions, there's always a couple of kids in the program where it's really, like, there's an obvious way to individualize, and there's obviously a motivating factor for them. So that's an easy one. That you get that. But then there are other kids where that's not the case.
Right. So this is what we know we're supposed to do, but we know from the poll that it doesn't feel exactly easy to do. And I know, and Jessica knows from our training in the field, that this is what teams really struggle with, just getting that in place. And I think really right now, I think there's 2 stages of how we thought about incentives and sanctions in juvenile drug court. Juvenile incentives and sanctions 1.0, the first operating system. It's that list I was talking about, that list of possible incentives that we created in chat, when we were brainstorming. The focus was on monetary incentives like gift cards, all the things that we could give them, and this punitive sort of sanction grids, and maybe the misuse of detention. That's what I sort of consider the first operating system of incentives and sanctions. But like our iPhones, that change constantly, we need to move forward and build in a new operating system for incentives and sanctions. And I think that's where we're at right now. And when I go on to discuss the three-prong approach, you'll see the difference in the operating systems. So in incentives and sanctions 2.0, the focus is on a really structured, measurable delivery of incentives and sanctions. So you have a really good policy and procedure in place to respond every single time. An effort to increase those incentives. Remember in the theory you want that 4-to-1 ratio. But if you don't have a really good structure in place where you're able to measure the delivery of incentives and sanctions, hard to know if you're increasing your incentives, right? Hard to know if you're even reaching that 4-to-1 ratio. And then an effort to reduce the misuse of detention. So maybe using detention in a way where we don't think it's effective anymore. So just detaining beyond the reasons why we should detain, so safety, and we're using it maybe to punish. We're moving away from that. And then the focus is now in this 2.0 on individualizing and providing meaningful incentives. So we had the 1.0, but we've been growing as a field. We've been learning a lot more about adolescent development, about what works in treatment with youth, and now we're going to move on to this incentives and sanctions 2.0. I think that's really, really important. So, Elo, can I ask you to bring up a video? Because I think this video is really going to showcase how the rest of this webinar is going to feel. You might want to turn up your speakers so you can actually hear the video here, because it will be coming out of your speakers.
You unlock this door with the key of imagination. Beyond it is another dimension, a dimension of sound, a dimension of sight, a dimension of mind. You're moving into a land of both shadow and substance, of things and ideas. You've just crossed over into the twilight zone.
So here on out, you might feel like you're in the twilight zone, but really we're just going to be talking about incentives and sanctions 2.0. But it's going to feel a little bit weird. But hopefully we can get through the material and then be able to answer some questions. And then if you even have more questions, we can talk a lot about the really big details of it in the later webinars, the ones for each of the prongs. So the three-prong approach, and I really think about this in 3 levels so that teams can complete a detailed structure to target all of these things in a really holistic way. So putting together an individualized privilege reduction plan to gain compliance over a single behavior, a dirty UA or a clean UA, every single time. And then the second prong, using behavior contracts to reward and motivate for positive behavior change in other areas like school attendance, family connectedness, and community involvement. And then program-wide incentives where we hope to motivate families and engage in the program, upward phase movement, and really just promote a strength-based atmosphere. And I'm going to go over all of the prongs in more detail. Some things, and this is why I think you might be entering the twilight zone, because some things that might be running through your mind during this presentation are these. So you're probably going to ask me, you want us to take away a cell phone or a game system? We can't do that. You want us to give these kids something for doing what they should already be doing! Exclamation point. You want us to work with families, but they don't want to work with us. You haven't talked about sanctions at all. What the heck? So these are some of the questions or statements that might be running through your mind as we go through this session, but hopefully I will address all of them. And if I don't, we'll come back to them. So let's get into it. The first prong, which is really the most valued privilege. And you'll see when I go through each of the prongs, they kind of get bigger. They start really small with a single behavior, and then they start growing. So the first prong, it's a privilege that the youth values and will work hard to earn. It's something that the team and the family and the youth are going to work together to determine what that privilege is, preferably family-based. And this most valued privilege which I'll now start calling an MVP, it's either given or taken away with each drug screen. So, Elo, can I ask you to pull up that video? I just want to use this to sort of highlight.
Can I bungee jump?
This. Again, with your speakers, you're going to want to turn them up so you can hear this.
Can I bungee jump?
No.
Can I have a tarantula?
No.
Can I borrow that?
No.
Can I have honey mustard and pickles? Sure.
At Subway, there's no such thing as no. You get exactly what you want. Subway, eat fresh.
Sort of goes into, I think it works really well with the most valued privilege and the rest of the 3 prongs. But what it sort of highlights is that we need to let kids have a choice in what motivates them. We need to talk to them about it. We need to get down to what's actually going to work with motivating this kid. So that you can actually make some change. We know that if we're doing if this then that rewards, we want it to be a very clear and simple path. So if you implement, if you work with the youth and family to figure out what motivates this kid, you have a really clear and simple path that you can begin using to get what you want, which are those clean UAs. And this is, you're going to make sure that you have really good drug testing procedures in place, but this is what you're going to move forward with. And it's basically contingency management. And where I got the most valued privileges from this book, you'll see it cited here, Contingency Management for Adolescent Substance Abuse, A Practitioner's Guide by Scott Hengler and Company. I recommend purchasing this book. I purchased it from Amazon.com, but it really gives a very detailed layout, actual scripts that you can use so you can develop a reward menu and do an inventory with youth to figure out what is going to motivate them. But it's simply, contingency management simply incorporates a relatively comprehensive framework in attenuating negative effects of substance use risk factors while building protective factors such as social skills, family involvement, and contacts with pro-socially peers. So when you get that book, and I hope that you do, it gives a really clear idea of what this means. But basically what it is every time you get a dirty UA from a kid and you've developed a most valued privilege with that youth and family, you simply take away that privilege. And then you return it when they provide you with what you want, which is your clean UA. So it's either given or taken away every time you get a clean or a dirty UA. So it makes the response very simple, very clear. That's a very clear path for the youth, for the family, for the court to be on so that you can get the behavior that you want. Why I think JDC should implement this is these theories are based in cognitive behavior therapy, which is proven to work with adolescents. It can be easily adapted within a juvenile drug court because I really think that this is the court's therapeutic response. So we know that treatment providers have a response to dirty UAs and clean UAs. They're going to work with that youth. They're going to be engaging that youth in treatment and talking about the way they use, how they use, what they use. But the court has to respond as well. And most often what I've seen is there isn't a really good happy medium in how they respond. Most of the time they might be thinking of mitigating circumstances. Was the youth honest? Did they have a flat tire? Could they not get to drug testing? All these circumstances that come into play when we're talking about drug testing, which makes it very difficult to respond to. In every court staffing that I observe, this is what teams talk about the most. They are in staffing, the kid was dirty, they don't know how to respond, they're not sure what to do, they know they have to in some way, and so what typically happens are the big three, right? An SA, community service, or detention. And maybe all of those big three sanctions aren't going to be very effective in getting what you want from that youth, which is the clean UA. So these are some of the reasons why I think we should be putting this in place. Hengler also did a study of 6 drug courts. This is a pretty small sample size, but there were positive results in this. But it's a pretty therapeutic way for teams to build in a response system to clean or dirty UAs. These are the practical reasons I was just talking about. I think that there's therapeutic reasons that works really well, and then practical reasons from court, which I think is the most important, because it's just hard to do your jobs, is that it provides a response to a dirty UA that is fair and consistent. It just happens every single time. It decreases those lengthy discussions that I was just talking about in pre-court staffing because you've already thought about the response. You already thought about what was going to happen. Decreases the discussions about those mitigating factors that I just brought up. And also what it does is it helps you track incentives and sanctions that correspond with clean or dirty UAs. So it's just one more measure that the team can be looking at. And of course with this, you'll have things that you need to consider. The team will have to, because you're not just going to implement this most valued privilege and everything is rosy, right? That's probably not the thing that we're going to experience with the youth we're working with. So teams will have to think about and discuss how many times they will go back to the drawing board, so to speak. So if the team and family and youth work together, develop their most valued privilege, and it isn't working, how many times will we go back and actually readjust that privilege? 2, 3 times? When do we put a graduated sanction in place if that isn't working? But what this does is provide you with some objective measures to actually count before you insert a graduated response, so you can get that graduated response that we were thinking of. Now, Jessica, I notice a lot of things are going on in chat.
Yeah, so let me tell you first about a question we just had. Somebody asked about marijuana. If the young person's been using marijuana, do you give back their most valued privilege if their level goes down? And so we talked a little bit in chat about how the best practice for drug testing really, the scientists are telling us not to use levels. It should be a binary, either a yes or a no. They're clean or they're dirty.
Right.
So I thought you could talk a little bit, though, about kind of when we start to implement the most valued privilege in the program. It doesn't happen at day one, does it?
No, it doesn't, Jess. And that is a really good question. So when a youth comes into drug court, probably they're in a phase that we might generally call orientation. And maybe this phase lasts 30 days. Maybe it's not time-bound. Maybe the team has decided that there's just like a checklist that they have to do in phase 1 to move up to phase 2. And probably at that time you're going to introduce drug testing to the youth, but you're really going to focus during that period of time on getting them used to the schedule. Maybe that there's a call-in number that they have to do. Where's the drug testing center, or do they have to come to court? They have to get used to this new procedure of drug testing 2 to 3 times a week and doing it at random times or using random tests. So we have that good drug testing procedure in place. But day one, when they first come in, Jessica, we're really going to focus on get to that. And then once we get them used to that, they've been assessed, they've done a youth inventory and worked with the youth and family, we've gotten to know them, we can figure out what a most valued privilege is. And so maybe in phase 2, we put in place a most valued privilege, so that we've already been sort of working with the youth. We've given them some tools, because in phase 1, sanctioning for a clean UA probably isn't the best practice because we want to build in some success. We want to get them to know what's going on in our program. So those are the types of things we would do before we implemented a most valued privilege.
Yeah, I think the other thing we should think about is which grading scale are you going to use? Does everybody start with a 0 and has to earn their way up to 100? Or do you want everybody to start with 100 and then they lose points? And so I like the idea with the most valued privilege that as soon as a young person tests clean, you could start the most valued privilege. So they start out having their privilege, and then it's only if they make a mistake that they lose the privilege, rather than starting out when they're still testing dirty that you take away the privilege and they have to earn it back.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jessica, because you want to make sure that they have this success. And then, the behavior happens, and then you remove that privilege. And that's where you're going to get the most bang for your buck. And it just has to be something, a privilege that they're going to say, well, I have to do this to get it back. They're going to have to want it back. That's the hook with the most valued privilege.
And the other reason to start with a clean test is that you don't have to wait that long if they test dirty to get to another clean test. I noticed that we had a little bit of a conversation in chat about like how long marijuana would stay in your system and all of those things. But really, if you have a clean test, it'll be a week or less before you have another clean test after that dirty test.
Right.
And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that we had somebody who suggested kind of a creative most valued privilege that they found with some of the young women in their program. So Athena mentioned that for some of the girls in their program, they actually take away makeup or their hair tools, right, like the hair straightener or the curling iron. And they had worked with, again, they'd worked with the girls and the families to sort of identify that. Because for those girls, those are really important things, right? And I was a teenage girl. I understand the importance of makeup. I know it's not every teenage girl that feels that way, but for those kids that's really important to, that's a really great idea.
Right. That reminds me of that story that LaTanya tells about the shoes. For the most valued privilege, we work with LaTanya. What's LaTanya's last name, Jessica? I'm blanking. Excuse me?
Harris.
Oh, Harris. We work with her quite a bit. She's from Lucas County or Toledo in Ohio, and she tells this great story about working with a kid, and the most valued privilege was a pair of shoes. So you can get pretty creative with this because you're really getting down to what's most going to work for that child. And the trick is to be just very, very consistent with taking away that privilege and giving it back.
So for one more question that's just come up in chat, I want you to address, and then we'll move on to the next segment, which is, what do you do if parents aren't really on board?
Well, I think that I'm always going to go to engagement first. So my thought process is that if we're bringing parents on board as an actual team member, and we're sitting down with them, and because when you go through the script that's actually in the book, you're doing this together. So you're figuring that out. You're getting buy-in while you're doing this. So you want to get them on board. And that's why I recommend keeping it very clear and simple. So don't muddy up the most valued privilege with a lot of different scenarios. It's just if this, then that. That's what it is. And I don't get really hung up maybe on the traditional family. So if we're finding a caring adult to figure it out. But you're going to just try to maneuver that as best you can. If there's absolutely no parent, you're going to try to work that out with the kid, but then that's a lot of work for the probation officer or case manager because you're going to have to go down there and immediately take whatever that is away. But that first step should always begin with engagement, and hopefully that sort of begins to give the family not the feeling, but the awareness that they're a part of the team. So that was the first prong, the most valued privilege. As you can see, we were just dealing with one single behavior. The second prong gets a little bit bigger, like I said. We grow as we go through the prongs. And this is talking about behavior contracts. This is actually detailed in the contingency management book as well, where you can put behavior contracts in place to target other behaviors like school attendance. It provides a step-by-step process for these for the kids and family to follow. It gets them working towards things that they're interested in. And you can also maybe use it as an increased response for noncompliance. So let's go into some more detail about behavior contracts. This is a sample of one. It's one we mock up for on-site TA or training that we do for incentives and sanctions. You can see that it's really spelled out for the youth. So it's a youth contract. There's a goal. There's objectives and tasks. We've listed the incentives. We spell out what happens for noncompliance. We've inserted a sanction there if there is noncompliance. And then we talk about some support services in actually achieving that goal. What I want to point out to you is that the goal is very proximal. It's not distal, meaning improve grades or just something so big that it would take a month or so to complete. You want to keep these pretty small, so the length of time that they're going to get done is maybe a week, or it's the interim before they have to come back to see the judge. So in this example, we have that the youth is going to finish 3 lessons in their English recovery class, and that we want them to do it before the next court hearing, which is a week away. And then we go through, you would be doing this with the youth and family and probably the case manager, probation officer, and maybe a treatment provider. If the treatment provider was doing it, that would be something the team would determine. But we'd be going through it and actually asking them, how long does each lesson take? How much time will it take to complete them? So if we ask them, how long does it take you to complete one? It takes me an hour and a half. Then you're going to add all those up and say, all right, this is how much time. So this is how much time. Now, when do you want to do it? John or Susie, do you want to do it after school, or do you want to do it all in the weekend? Let's think about this. Like, how are you actually going to get this done? Because when you come into court, the judge is going to say, hey, it looks like you were supposed to complete 3 recovery classes. Did you? And the youth will be able to say yes or no. Yes, because see, here's my contract and it's all done. Or no, I didn't, for whatever reason. But now we have an actual objective thing that we can measure and look at. So if we're thinking about incentives, of course we're going to be able to praise them, recognize them. If you're using a point level reward system or token system, which I'll talk about later, you can give them points. The natural incentive, of course, is getting closer to completing that course. But you see that this was all done sort of on the front end, so it's very clear. So they know what the incentive will be, and then they know what noncompliance means. It means, well, I didn't use my time wisely, so it looks like I'm going to have a curfew reduction because I kept goofing around, so I have to spend more time at home so I can get these credit recovery classes done. So you see how it's sort of connected. And then the support services are really to help the youth complete the goal, not used as a sanction. So sometimes I've seen courts as a sanction add tutoring service as a sanction. That's a help. We're going to help the youth figure out how to complete that goal. But you can think of behavior contracts as this way to set up proximal goals to complete a distal goal that's sort of identified, not sort of, that is identified in their case plan and which is based off an assessment that has been done. So you're tying this all together and really individualizing it. All the kids are probably going to be doing the same process, but the function of it will force the team to be individualized, so that it's the individually they're working on this one goal that is just for them. So sure, maybe every kid has this proximal goal is to improve, or this distal goal to improve grades or improve school connectedness, but we can insert some proximal goals to actually achieve that, otherwise known as objectives, right? So when we're doing those objectives, we're achieving a goal. So that's a basic overview of a really structured youth contract that I think teams can work with. What I love about them is they're things that they're paper. You can count them. So you can count how many they completed. You can count how many they didn't complete. It's objective. You can say, based on how many they've completed, it's progress towards a goal. It's progress towards moving through a phase. It's progress towards completing a treatment program. So you can see some objective measures. Now, another way that you might want to use a youth contract is as an increased response. I don't recommend sort of mixing the two. So you either sort of decide, well, our youth contracts are just what we have in place to help kids meet distal goals, so we can task out some objectives for them. Or you have youth contracts because when they're on a youth contract, it means you've stepped up your response. So perhaps maybe a youth continues to violate a rule, and despite privileges being taken away, it's not working. So maybe you put in a youth contract or a behavior contract to motivate them to follow this rule. The youth and family are asked for input on what motivates them, and then the youth is asked in court to report out on this contract. So, but it's just like this helps you build that graduated approach. So you've started with engagement, you've taken away a privilege, and then you've increased a response with a youth contract. So I think you can use youth contracts in a couple different ways. As a graduated process, as a way to count that graduated process, as a way to count progress for youth, but most importantly, this is very objective way to for the team, for the youth, for the family, for treatment providers, for probation officers to figure out what's exactly going on. Now, Jessica, I notice there's a lot of stuff going on in chat again.
There absolutely is, but it is all about parent engagement still, and how do we get the parents to be on board. So we haven't really been talking at all about behavior contracts. So I'll let everybody know that the Campaign for Youth Justice has a great book called Families Come First that has some really good strategies for how to engage with parents, because you can take a route where if parents aren't compliant, you can, in some jurisdictions, the judge can do things like hold them in contempt of court, and you can get judges to do things that way. But really we want them, like Wendy said, to become a partner with us in our process. So I would suggest checking out the Campaign for Youth Justice's resources. We actually did a series of webinars on the Family Comes First book last spring, and they're not on our website right now because we're doing a revamp, but they will be soon. And if you'd like to receive a copy, you can just email us and ask for it, and you can watch those 3 webinars on how to engage with families and how to make them a partner in your process.
Right, and I would say that I just don't let it be a barrier. So ask what the parents can do, what they're willing to do. If you can't get them completely engaged in the process, you're still there to help the youth. We can find hopefully maybe we can find a caring adult to help the youth, or we can rely on the resiliency of the youth to be able to do it. The trick, I think, is to be very clear and have a structure and process that they can follow. If it's a little wishy-washy, if it's not very clear, that becomes really hard to navigate the system. And so I feel like my response would be to shut down. So even if you are incentivizing to get them to engage, to get them to do something, maybe it isn't very clear. Maybe it isn't very consistent. Maybe it isn't perceived as being very fair. So if you can take care of those things with some good structure and measure that and do quality improvement on it, I think that you'll be in a better place to figure out what actually works with your families. And it doesn't have to be 100%. You can think about it in different levels of engagement. Right, Jess?
Absolutely.
So that was the second prong, behavior contracts. I think that they're a great way to, like I said, objectively measure what type of progress we're getting kids to do on any sort of goals and objectives that we're having them work on. So now we're going into the third prong, the third and final prong, program-wide incentives. And so when we did the first poll asking whether or not anybody knew about program-wide incentives, there was a lot of no's in that one, but I said I would wager you probably did know. Some examples are a rocket docket, where you motivate youth and families on a weekly basis with an early out. So if you have kids doing really well, you put them at the front of the docket. They get to quickly check in with the judge and team, and they get to hightail it out of there. So it's a nice incentive for youth and families, free as well. Positive peer-to-peer reinforcement or point-level reward system or token reward system. I'm going to show a couple of just quick examples of the first two, and then I'm going to go into great detail about the point-level reward system. So the rocket docket, if any of you have seen this, many teams, sometimes they'll call it the 100% club, where they have certain criteria that the youth have to meet, and if they meet it, they put it on a big flip chart, whiteboard, screen in their courtroom. These people get to go first and leave early. I think if you make it really visual, it can be a nice program-wide incentive that sort of just promotes this happier atmosphere. Positive peer-to-peer reinforcement. This is a program that was developed by the El Paso County Juvenile Drug Court in Texas. They use this. It's pretty simple. It's really easy to implement. They take a mason jar. They bought a bag of marbles. And every time the youth come to court and every one of them tests clean, they get to put a marble in the jar. And once that jar is full, the team buys the youth a pizza party. And they don't get too hung up on all the particulars. It's pretty simple. They just, if everyone's clean, marble. If not, not. So it's just a simple way to have just one added little thing. Doesn't cost a lot of money, doesn't take a lot of time, but it's just a simple way to promote just sort of this atmosphere in court that's a little bit more positive than probably what the youth and family and maybe even the JDC team is used to. So that's just one example of putting something in place. The point level reward system, or a token economy, that I really want to go into detail with is, and we actually have some data coming out of Albuquerque, New Mexico. Lindsay Lucero, what I'm going to be presenting on is her framework in the Albuquerque Juvenile Drug Court. And she went to town creating a point level reward system. She really thought about it and took a very I'm going to be redundant here. It was a very thoughtful process and how she put it together. But I think that JDCs can actually think of themselves as this institutional setting where they can create a microeconomy, where they can attach value to things that are otherwise not valuable at all, certainly not to the youth we're working with. A couple things I think it does, though, is, again, you're going to hear me say, it gives us a chance to objectively measure where the youth is at in this process. How many tokens or points have they used? In everything that we are doing now at NCJ, FCJ, we're asking people to measure. What's objective? What can we measure? What can we count? And this is a point level reward system is a way to codify a specific reward system where you're just attaching value to things that you want them to do. It's a different way of thinking about it, whereas before we were thinking of control and accountability, and if you don't do this, then you're going to be in trouble. We're thinking this way. We're thinking, I want you to do this, so I'm going to give you this to do it. So a lot of things that you're going to have to think about are, determining what these tasks are and what they're worth. And this is what this coordinator in Albuquerque did. She spent a lot of time being thoughtful about what a point-level reward system means in a juvenile drug court and how she could weave it into her whole program. So this is what she thought about. Youth can earn points for just standard things that she wanted them to do. So she attached value to these things. So they can earn points for attending therapy and fully participating, attending school with no absences, and check-in every day. The check-ins with probation officers. Value, it's worth 2 points. What was kind of brilliant about it is that she attached sort of a level of choice here for the kids. So they can earn full points and attend therapy fully and participate, and attend school with no absences and check in every day, or they can earn partial points. So they just show up to therapy, but they're not going to participate. They're going to sit there with their hands folded. They're going to attend school, but maybe they were absent. They're going to not check in every day, but most of the time and then she said, and this is what it means when you earn 0 points. So she defined every point in that, so they could make an actual decision about what they want to do on an age. So the brilliant part about that is the choice, attach value, adding a framework that she can count. Now she can count how they are doing, because if they're actively participating, it almost necessarily means they are achieving some sort of goals that have been set up for them. So they're using points to promote pro-social activities here. So she actually attached points to pro-social activities. She thought about it in 2 ways. Her kids have a ton of community service built up, and she had 2 problems facing her. They weren't completing it, and also it was difficult to find people in the community to help them complete it. So she came up with some assignments. There are things that she wants them to do, he wants them to do. So she attached some value to it. And this is a quick sample of what she's done. In the 3-prong approach and the materials that are attached to the webinar, the overview provides her whole framework. So it's long, so the kids have a lot of choice. So the assignment, have a family dinner, keep a planner of appointments and assignments, keep a daily journal, explore alternative education program. You can see this. So they can either use the points for community service or earn bonus points to add to their bank of points. These kids in this program literally have a checking account of points. So they have their bank of points that they have to keep track of. When they're spending the points, they actually have to write a check for what they're buying with their points, because she's made a microeconomy here. So they can
Wendy, I wanted to chime in.
Okay, go right ahead.
So Hancock County out in Mississippi did something kind of cool with these sort of extra activities. You know, we always have these pro-social activities and things we want kids to do. I see lots of courts that want kids to keep a journal, to pick something like church and attend church. And what Hancock County did is that they had a certain number of bonus points kids were kind of required to earn. And so, but they gave them a list of literally 40 different options for how to earn points. And so they have that, all of those sort of program activities and those things that you'd like kids to do, where so many courts are requiring it, and then it's really hard. They're like writing an essay in the back of the courtroom, but waiting to get called so they can complete that requirement. And so it was a great way to do some of those things without making it contingent on progress. So it became an extra.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic. So many times, I mean, and I know you have too, Jess, we've read in policy and procedure manuals a list of requirements that youth have to do, and we've kind of agreed that we're setting youth up for failure here, where we can sort of flip the switch because we know we want them to do it, but in the past, I think we were focused on accountability and control, where we're saying, well, you must do this, it's become a requirement, and then if you don't, a punishment comes in, where we and incentivizing them to do these things that we want to get them to do. So adding that, attaching that value, creating a microeconomy is a great way to do that. So this slide here shows what the youth can purchase with their earned points. So their reward, a credit for 1 hour of community service, extend their curfew, and a $10 gift purchase. What I really loved about this approach was there was actually guidelines, almost like credit ratings, right? So if you wanted to purchase, if you wanted to extend your curfew, so you spend 10 points and you had it, there was a guideline that you must be checking in and can't be on house arrest or have a curfew violation in the past 2 weeks. So you have to get to do better. So it all is connected into achieving sort of that positive behavior that we want. So let me just go back here real quick because I want to, before we go in, we do have some lovely data. So I want to talk about questions.
We're having a great conversation in chat. Jennifer Winkler from Travis County, Texas, who I've been working with, together their point level reward. They actually did it in Excel, so it added up all of their points for them, which I think is really a smart way to use technology. So she sent that to me so we can take a look at it, and that could be something that we can eventually share with everybody on the webinar. And that's one of the things I wanted to let everybody know, is that if you're doing cool stuff, let us know, because we'd like to kind of take a look at what you're doing, see if we can get some data from you, and then we can be sharing your story here on a webinar, you know, in the future. We're all in this together, and we can't change practice unless we know what practice is and what best practice is, and so we really rely on courts to do that. And so then the next thing is a question that came up from Robin, and she was asking if about completing the program and using points as part of graduation, and I know you're going to talk about that in a minute. So I just wanted to let folks that are curious about that know that we're going to be getting to there soon.
Right. That's a good question. Yeah. Angela down here asked about this program. New Mexico right now is sitting at about 30 kids. Their capacity is 30, and I think that they might be a little bit over. The last time I checked in with them, around 33. So this is some of the data that Lindsay Lucero was collecting. The thing that really I want to talk about the thing that sparked this. So the NCJFCJ Juvenile Drug Court Learning Collaborative. So they are a part of the Learning Collaborative and receiving a lot of training and technical assistance. But the thing that they did first before we even went out to do an initial site visit was they took a look at their data, and there was two things that they were looking at. They were looking at how they were using detention. And data site, so everybody in the jurisdiction was attempting to reduce their use of detention. But the juvenile drug court wasn't. It was doing its own thing. It wasn't reducing the use of detention. And they actually had a pretty punitive sanction grid in place. So if you had gotten up to 4 dirty UAs, you were, thank you, Jessica, you were spending about 8 days in detention. That graduated, but it was quite punitive. So they knew that they wanted to reduce that. They had to. That was sort of, that was what was coming down from on high. You have to reduce this use of detention. So they had to do that, but also they wanted to increase the amount of incentives that they were giving. So two things they had to do was begin tracking incentives, because they actually weren't tracking that. Oh, no, I'm wrong. I'm sorry. They had to begin really focusing on how to focus more on incentives. And remember when I said incentives and sanctions 2.0, the focus, how can we increase incentives to reach that 4-to-1 ratio? And so this is what prompted them to put this in place. So it took them probably 8 months to get this completely in place. But once they did, you can see from the data that they almost doubled the amount of incentives given out each month from 2013 to 2015. But what's funny is the next bullet point is they reduced their average cost of incentive by $3. So that's weird. So they doubled their amount of sanctions, but they reduced their average cost. And because what Lindsay is finding, because she's really looking at what motivates these kids, it's the points. So when they're looking at what they can get for rewards, they choose points. They want extra points. They want to get the bonus points, because that's what it means. They're collecting these points because they're so connected to how they move through the phases and how they proceed, how that value is attached to things. They're actually spending less money on incentives, because most of the incentives that they're giving are free. In fact, 78% of the incentives that they gave out in 2015 cost $5 or less, and 54% of those were free. So she's really tracking this. She's keeping an eye on it. And they do have funding for incentives, but how powerful is this message when you can go to stakeholder group, you can go to state agency to get funding for maybe big ticket items for incentives that you want for your program, where you can say, we're really using our incentives wisely. This is sustainable. We can keep this going because we're being very thoughtful about how we use our incentives in the program. So connecting the dots is really important to the three-prong approach. When you're putting the 3 prongs together, you're going to want to think about it as a way to just really create an overarching reward system, microeconomy, however you want to say it. You want to tie all these things together so that they begin to make a lot of sense, so that you can track them more effectively. Some things you might want to consider. If you have a point level reward system, do you to get maximum points for the week just automatically make it on a rocket docket? So you've connected those two dots. Pro-social activities that are used to get bonus points, can those be planned out in a youth contract? So we're sort of connecting that dot. Number of MVPs earned in a row can earn up to blank amount of points. So you can connect those dots to make it sort of a seamless process. Another way to connect the dots is using points to maybe phase up. And this is in Albuquerque what they have been doing. So this is why it's so valuable to them to have this for the youth to have this microeconomy, because it actually means they can get out of the system, right? They're in there. The main thing they want to do is graduate. And when I've been on site and observed, that's the thing that I observe youth and families have the most frustration with. They don't know when, they might not even know what phase they're in. They don't know when they're going to graduate. They don't know when they're going to get into phase 1, 2, or 3. So if you can make this very tangible for them, a process by which they can count, it becomes easier. So into phase 2, you need 50 points, 70 points, 70 points, 40 points. And Albuquerque was very thoughtful about this too, just actually thinking about like how many times they would have to earn this many points every week to get 50 points. And so she's thinking about how long she wants them to stay in the program. But it makes it a very clear and consistent goal, doesn't it? Oh, I need 50 points. I can do that. And then the youth sit down and write a check to get out of phase 2. I just want to point out there are other goals attached with the phases. So they have to reach these other goals plus earn the points. But as they reach those other goals, they're earning points, so it's kind of balancing out. It's just kind of equal when you go down. So that's how Albuquerque connected its dots. So that's a three-prong approach. You know, we think about a privilege reduction, about a single behavior. I want a clean UA, and I want to give you a privilege for giving that to me. And if you don't, I'm going to take away that privilege. The second prong, using behavior contracts to really task out what we want these kids to do, to plan for reaching proximal goals in school connectedness, family connectedness, or community involvement. So we're thinking really concrete about that. So we're taking it out of the abstract for them and putting it on paper and having them think about and plan a process by which they're going to achieve a goal. And then program-wide incentives is the third prong, where we're actually putting in this, you know, elaborate might not be the right word, but maybe it is, just this whole process in place where we're putting everything together to promote the strength-based atmosphere. And I think this really flips the switch on how we were thinking about, if you don't do this, I have to punish you, where we're thinking, okay, I want you to do this, so what can I give you to do it? How can I engage you to do it? Because I really want you to do it. So that's how you're sort of thinking about the three-prong approach. So let's see. Elo, can you bring up a poll for me? I'm interested to see if I changed anybody's minds, if they were actually going through the session today and thinking these thoughts that are up here on the screen. I want to know if I changed your mind. Did I answer these questions? So after viewing this webinar today, I understand that incentives are more important than sanctions to change behavior. What do you think?
And Wendy, while folks are answering the poll, I just want to make a comment about using points for phasing. I typed this into the chat. One of the things that you and I see when we go out and we visit all of the courts that we do is that that if you actually look at the length of time kids spend in a phase and in the program, it's always longer than what the court thinks it's going to be, right? So phase 1 is supposed to last 30 days, but most kids don't finish in 30 days, and instead they're in for 45 days or 60 days. And so for those kids, that can feel pretty demoralizing if it's really time-bound like that. And so the idea of points for phasing means that it's really in their hands. If you want to get done with phase 1, you got to earn the points. So that means you got to go to school. And it makes it very concrete, and it makes it very easy for them to see how they can meet your expectations. When we interview kids and families, so often we hear from them that they don't really know what they're supposed to do, and it sometimes feels like a moving target.
Right. I totally agree. And that's one of the things we're finding out in the Learning Collaborative is that most of the youth are staying in much longer, upwards of 50% longer in each phase. And they are benchmarks we should try to reach. Of course, it's not going to be perfect, but we do have, a time frame on there for a reason. So, yeah, I think the points give it a much more concrete feeling to moving in the phases. So in the last poll is gone, but we didn't get anybody saying they didn't agree, Jess.
I know. I'm very surprised.
So I'm happy about that. So after viewing this webinar, I think I can reward kids for what they are supposed to be doing anyway. What do you guys think about that? So we got a lot of agrees, somewhat agree. Not that I needed to change everyone's mind. I didn't. And I welcome everyone to join the webinars where we go into each of the prongs in more details, because this is a very fast-paced webinar, and they're complex topics where I'm talking about several different things, and most of you are probably wondering, how would I even implement that? I don't understand. So, but we do have tools that actually will help people implement these processes.
Wendy, I want to make a note for folks that maybe didn't at the beginning of the webinar because of our sound difficulties, that this is the first part of our series on this, and that we're going to be spending our next 3 webinars actually going into more depth about each prong, and Elo is just putting that all up there now. So if you want to know more about the most valued privilege and what do we really mean and how do we really engage parents in that process, join us for that webinar. If you're interested in that behavior contract and how it really works and can you do 2 contracts at one time and all of those logistics, join us for that webinar. And then if you're really more interested in learning about this point level reward system and want to know more, you can join us for that webinar. And for that webinar, we're actually going to probably have Lindsay Lucero on with us so she can answer some more practical questions about how those points really work for their team. And if you're really interested in all 3, then you should sign up for all 3.
Right. Thank you, Jessica. I think the next 3 webinars will be really, really practical. A lot of going through exactly how you would put these procedures in place. So with that, we're coming to a close, Jess. This recommended reading talks or gives the exact titles of the contingency management book that I mentioned and borrowed liberally from, although I cite it all through the webinar. But that's when I read that book, that's when light bulbs really started going off for me when I think about incentivizing for youth. So that book, Contingency Management for Adolescent Substance Abuse, A Practitioner's Guide, was a very powerful tool in helping me understand how to work with adolescents, providing therapeutic approaches to incentivize them that are for kids. So With that, I would like to thank you very much for participating, for writing so much in chat. I could just see it flying. And I'd like to thank Jessica for monitoring that and making sure we were catching everybody's questions and